Welcome to Showbiz Chicago, the podcast. I have a returning guest with me, and one of the most interesting interviews I've ever done almost a year ago. Her name is, of course, Susan Lacy, creator of PBS's American Masters, and she has just completed and will be airing in the next week or two a fantastic biography of our friend David Geffen. It's called Inventing David Geffen. So welcome, Susan, back to the program.
Delighted to be here.
So, tell me about your ideas of, well, first of all, why David Geffen?
Well, David Geffen is actually a completely fascinating person. Mysterious, stood out of the public eye to a very large degree. But this man has cast this incredibly wide net of influence, including, bringing to the fore many of the musical artists that I grew up on and loved. And that was kind of the original way I got to know him. I had made a film about Joni Mitchell, which I directed a few years ago, and he was Joni's manager, and also she was on his Asylum, which is his record label.
Right.
And that's how I got to know him and became very interested in his story, and the more I looked into it, I thought there would be a fascinating television program.
So how do you go about starting a project like this, Susan? Especially with a man so complex and complicated. How do you go from beginning to end in creating what we're going to see as a 2-hour program?
Well, first I had to get him to say yes.
Right, and how was that? How did you convince him?
Which wasn't terribly difficult, actually, because he's been a fan of the series, but he is a man who doesn't like to talk about himself a great deal, so there was a little bit of persuasion that had to happen there about doing many lengthy interviews. This was a project done over a long period of time. So what's the first thing? Oh my goodness. There's such a vast array of archival and musical material in this film. So the first thing I always do on every film is to make sure I can get access to the material that I need to tell the story. We do an enormous amount of research and uncover all kinds of things, from stills to headlines to whatever archive footage exists. In David's case, very little of him. We cast a pretty wide net out there looking for stuff, which is how I found that new young footage of young David Geffen on the phone.
That was fantastic.
Which was shot by very young, but basically there's been very little of David on film, so it became very essential to have all the artists represented in the film archivally. So it's just a huge research effort, and then of course lining up all the people in the film. I did more interviews for this film than I usually do because I felt part of the story here was the incredibly large and diverse group of people that David's lives have been touched by David. So I wanted them all in the film, and everybody in the film is a celebrity. So it took quite a long time to schedule all these interviews.
So when you were interviewing him, Susan, at any point, and what do you feel was the most difficult for him to open up about?
Well, I don't like to speak for David, in any way.
But as a director and producer, when you were
I think he's generally less comfortable talking about his personal life,
right.
And then he was telling stories from his career or growing up, or how he got involved in the whole Leah Morris story. I mean, these are stories he's very comfortable with. But I think talking about coming out, talking about his scare with cancer, talking about various relationships that didn't necessarily go the way he wanted them to go. But these are things that are hard for a lot of people to talk about, not just David. But he did. I mean, he's a courageous guy. He went there with me. He said, "Why do you need to do this?" I'm making a film about you. And it's one of the things that you love about, or have loved about our films, is that they touch you. They have a heart.
They're human.
And you need to help me with that, and he did.
So I do want to talk about a couple things that you touched on in the biography. One being the cancer scare that we just talked about, because he was diagnosed and went through this whole process for, I believe it was 3 years, that found out that it was a misdiagnosis.
It was actually 4 years.
4 years. How he says that, he went through all the emotional trauma of it, without the outcome that a lot of people have to deal with. But do you really think that was a pivotal point in his life before the AIDS crisis?
I do. I think it was. I don't think he ever thought he was going to die, but I think he thought his life might be radically altered. With bladder cancer it was. So I think he did a lot of soul searching at that time. And I think it did, he did emerge from it as somewhat, mellower version of David Geffen. I don't think it completely changed him, but I think it gave him a perspective on life that people who face serious illness often have. And 4 years of thinking that you've got a serious illness that could affect your life it's a long time.
Absolutely.
So I think he feels it was like a lot of people say, some good can come out of something like that, and I think he feels that way about that.
So when you were talking to him, Susan, the other interesting thing about David Geffen is he started at such an early age in getting very established artists to, believe in his concept and believe in him. What do you think it is about him, with you having a dialogue with him back and forth and getting to know him, that attracted these artists to trust him when he was so young?
That's a very good question, actually. He's very compelling. David Crosby says in the film, he makes an immediate impression. He's really smart. He was really dedicated. And let's face it, it wasn't like everybody in the world was racing, to represent these artists. I mean, he even said in the movie he couldn't believe that there was all this talent there and that nobody wanted them.
Right.
So that's compelling when somebody really believes in you and wants you, and the world isn't, necessarily rushing you to the door. And he's terribly smart and funny, and put shoulders to the wheel. So it doesn't surprise me that they all wanted to be represented by him.
Right, but and as his career progresses, and it's just amazing, the loyalty stayed, and even when he was going through these different partnerships and Asylum Records, and then selling off these companies, there were still these core people around him. But a lot of his friends even did feel betrayed by him when he was selling out, which I think was a very interesting concept.
That's in the film. So some artists definitely felt that they had signed with David, and when David sold without telling people that he was going to, sold Asylum to Warner, and that they were now part of a big corporation instead of a boutique, small record label. They were unhappy.
Sure.
And I think some of them, I think that was hard for a lot of them to get over.
Absolutely. The other favorite line in the biography is we're talking about Cher. They're talking about Cher at this point, and you cut to Elton John, where he goes, Well, what gay man isn't in love with Cher? But everybody was shell-shocked that he was really in love with Cher, and Cher was in love with him.
Yes, I think it was a very serious relationship. And that can sometimes happen. You know, how do you explain it? It just was. She's completely delightful. David was completely in love with her, and she was him. But as we said, it wasn't in the cards.
Right. No, it wasn't.
She fell in love with Greg Allman.
No. It's a deck of cards, and he's the queen.
I really had a big screening in Los Angeles last week, and Cher was there.
Yeah. Well, again, it speaks to his loyalty and how people love him after all these years.
That's really true. I mean, all of Hollywood showed up for this screening in Los Angeles last week. It was amazing.
Wow.
Lots of fun.
I also want to talk about Michael Bennett. And I actually broke up at that point. I was crying my eyes out. My family knew Michael Bennett very well. That seemed to be another pivotal point. Well, first of all, the whole theatrical, producing Cats and Dreamgirls and all that, and getting to know Michael Bennett on that end of it. But that relationship with Michael Bennett seemed to springboard him to another, level in not only his career, but to his emotional soundness, I think.
Well, I mean, even with coming out as gay.
Well, not even. Well, first of all, dealing with the whole AIDS crisis with Michael Bennett, I think that was the first person he knew, and the crisis was really just beginning at that point.
Yeah,
and he was in the midst of it in the theater community. So I really think, when you were talking with him, how was that conversation when he was, talking about Michael Bennett?
I remember when I did that interview that day, and he talked so openly and candidly about his fear of AIDS and checking his body in the shower every day, and the fear, and the shame. Going to an anonymous clinic, waiting months and months and months to go and find out the results. I mean, he was really scared, as a lot of people were. And I was surprised at how open he was and candid about that, and I was very affected. I was very moved by that part of his story as well.
And was one of really the first people, Susan, to fund research on it on a grand scale.
I think he may, and I really should check this, but it's not the most, certainly among the most, has given the most AIDS research in this country. Absolutely.
And then I just want to skip forward like a few years when he went to DreamWorks, and they're showing the press conference. And Steven Spielberg and Jeffrey Katzenberg were saying how nervous he was to be in that environment, even though that's something he strived for all his life.
He's very shy, and he was very nervous about going out there doing this press conference. In fact, I think he was throwing up. I didn't include that in the film, but that he was. He kind of was very nervous about it. I can't do this, I can't do it. And he went out there, as Jeffrey said, he was the funniest and the wittiest and the most affecting person in the press conference.
Right, you could tell, like, at that press conference, in the clips that you showed, Susan, as the press conference was going on, then as soon as David spoke, it took, everybody felt more comfortable, and it was witty, and people became engaged just when he started speaking, which again, that's his ability to communicate with the masses on an innate level, I think.
I think it's also because he really does limit his exposure on this kind of stuff.
That's true.
It's fascinated to hear from him and about him, because he has, and I think there are a lot of reasons he stayed behind the scenes. One is, I don't think he wanted to overshadow his artists.
Right.
As either their manager or the head of the record label. In terms of DreamWorks, he was the business guy behind it. Not one of the creative forces. But I think David in general has tried to stay behind the scenes largely for that, but also because he is basically innately shy.
Right. And
hard to believe that. Hard to believe it because he's a good storyteller and he's so funny and he's so straightforward. But it's one thing to do that in the privacy of your home or with your close friends and in a small circle. It's another to put yourself out there in the world, and that's something he has chosen not to do.
right.
He could have. I can't tell you. I mean, he's not doing any press for this film.
So I found out.
As you said, why ask me to do something I spent my whole life avoiding doing? And I thought that was a very legitimate statement.
That's right. He's true to himself.
Exactly.
True to himself. And the other thing I wanted to touch on was his relationship with Yoko Ono. Because what struck me is that he was very new to John and Yoko. And you'd think with all these people that John and Yoko have got to know over decades and decades, it was David who knew them a short period of time that was thrust into having to plan his funeral, which I thought was...
Well, he was the only person that Yoko called. We did a film a couple of years ago on the last 10 years of John Lennon's life called Lennon NYC, another beautiful film. And in doing that film, we learned that John and Yoko didn't have a lot of friends. It's so hard to believe. I know that we couldn't believe that Yoko was saying we really didn't have a lot of friends. We stuck pretty much with each other, and nobody was really interested in us. He wasn't a Beatle anymore. He had taken this time out to be a father and hadn't recorded in a long time. So when David approached them, when it became clear that John Lennon was going to record again, everybody was after, all the record companies were after him, of course. But the reason that David got the job is he was smart enough to go to Yoko. Yoko was the one running the business. John didn't want to deal with the business. And I remember being so struck by that story and thinking, that's just a perfect example of why, as the late Nora Ephron says in the movie, he's David Geffen and we're not. But he got that. He got that the person to go to was Yoko. But it was interesting that her perception, I don't know if it's actually true, but her perception of that time was that they did become a lot of friends. So when David came into their lives, they became immediately very close with him, and they spoke every day. So it's not surprising that he was the one that was called when Lennon was shot.
And you know what else? I think it could be, Susan, and I'm just surmising, but, as a gay man myself, a lot of times we see past what, straight men, just take as the truth. So, a straight man, and in that kind of world of production, I'm sure they do think that, John Lennon would control everything. Who would, but I think as a gay man, he's got different sensibilities and different
things. I hadn't thought of that in that way at all. I just thought he knew that Yoko was running the business and he was smart enough to go to her.
Right. But
that is a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, I think, him dealing with Cher, and she's such a powerful woman, and gay men are attracted, I think, to powerful women, and they're not, I'm searching for the word, but I think they respect women more. And so they're not going to be, so I think that could be part of it. I really do.
He also had quite a role model in his mother.
That's very true. Very true. Very true.
A formidable woman and quite a good businesswoman, and I think David learned quite a bit from her.
Yeah, I'd love the line in there, Susan, where they're going shopping, I think Bloomingdale's, and she would, bring a shirt up to the counter and, haggle the price.
I know. I get a big laugh every time.
Oh, my God. So with all the...
you know what, they're doing in the movie, I directed the movie, sat in the edit room with it, 9 months, putting it together, and I still laugh. I found a bunch of things in the movie. They still make me laugh every time. That's one of them.
So with all the biographies that you've done so far, Johnny Carson, that American Masters has done, Cab Calloway, Judy Garland, what is the through line, do you think, that all these phenomenal artists have in common?
Oh, that's such a difficult question because everybody's life and career is so different. But, you know, one of the things that I have, I do think there might be something that is similar in many, many stories is kind of, there's something in a lot of artists' lives that's about overcoming something.
Right.
Whether it's overcoming a difficult childhood, or it's overcoming personal demons, or, you know, any number of things. Often relationships with parents, that seems to be something of a through line. But, you know, most artists have not had an easy life.
Right.
And I don't know what that is. I'm certainly not a psychiatrist. I'm not going to try to say something, you know, be an armchair psychiatrist here. But I think something about the isolation that comes from many artists' childhood, because they're different. I think that's something that I've noticed as a through line in many, many, many cases, particularly of people I've made films about.
I think that's very true. I think that's a very good observation. How is getting to know David Geffen and interviewing him, how has he affected your life?
I'm sorry, say that again?
In your conversations with David Geffen and getting to know him, how has he affected your life?
Well, you know, I spent the last 4 years thinking about David Geffen. It's affected my life greatly. I really enjoyed very much getting to know him. He's not only an interesting guy, he's a very generous person, a nice person. People don't know that about him. I didn't know that about him before I got to know him. But he cares a lot about the people around him. And, you know, I spent a lot of time, I probably spent more time thinking about what makes David Geffen tick than, you know, almost anybody. People have written books about him. But, so it's of course affects your life. You get so involved with your subjects. You know, you go to bed every night thinking about them and trying to figure out how can I make the story as interesting as possible? How can I make people relate to this story? One thing I did know about David in the making of this film is that I really needed to get to the human element in him. People can't relate to a billionaire, but they can relate to somebody who had their heart broken. And they can relate to somebody who feared that they were stupid when they were a kid. So, yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to pull that out and get it into the film. And now, you know, I'm always sad when the film is about to broadcast because it means it's really over. You know, it's a little bit of a postpartum after you delved into a person's life so intimately, and then it's over. You know.
So you're giving birth.
On to the next one.
Giving birth. So what's in your uterus that you're giving birth to next, Susan?
Oh, I wish I could tell you, but there's some really biggies coming up, but we're still finding agreement, so I'm not at liberty to say yet. But I'll let you know as soon as I'm able to.
Absolutely. Well, I adore you, Susan. I think what you do is so important, and there's nobody better on this planet that does what you do.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, we'll probably be talking in another year, my friend.
Okay. Have a good one.
Okay.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you, Susan.
All right. Bye-bye.